Jonas Ellison used to think he knew every inch of Maple Rise, the restaurant chain he had built from a humble sandwich counter at age 28. 30 years later, he was the CEO of 214 branches across the United States, employing thousands. Grounded in a single belief: customers always feel humanity if the one serving them still holds on to sincerity. But that morning, in a quiet corner of Lowell, a location reporting unusually low revenue, Jonas stepped into the restaurant dressed as a house painter, old work clothes, mud-stained shoes, and a cap pulled low over his face. No one knew who he was, and he didn't expect to hear a sentence that would shatter his entire world view. The door creaked open. The overhead bell rang its familiar chime, but instead of warmth, it made Jonas's heart pound inexplicably. He chose a secluded booth near a mural of waffles where he could watch both the cashier and the open kitchen. A young woman appeared, wearing a wrinkled light blue uniform. Her name tag read Lani. She walked to his table without a greeting, smile, or small talk, just a flat, fragmented question. "What do you want?" Her voice was monotone. Her eyes never met his. The hand holding her notepad trembled subtly, the kind of tremble Jonas had seen before, when employees stood in front of a boss, not a customer. He ordered the Rise Morning, the chain's signature breakfast. Lani nodded, turned away, then abruptly stopped. She bent lower, pretending to pick up a fallen pen. In that fleeting moment, she whispered, barely above a breath, "I'm sorry. I'm not allowed to talk to you." Jonas froze. That sentence was colder than any plate of eggs, sharper than any knife in the kitchen. Not allowed to talk to him. Why? Who forbade it? And why him? Specifically, she had no idea that the man sitting across from her was the founder of this place, the man who once wiped tables, carried trays, and told his first employees, "People come for the food, but they return for kindness in your eyes." Yet here, today, amid yellow-painted tables and colorful pastry ads, Jonas saw no kindness, only fear. And in that moment, he understood the worst thing wasn't bad service, it was organized silence. Something was operating in the shadows, invisible, but real. And Jonas knew he wasn't leaving this place until he uncovered that truth. He sat quietly, hiding the instincts of a CEO who had managed thousands, but his eyes, by habit, scanned the room, every gesture, every expression, every small irregularity. Lani returned with a cup of coffee. No smile, no words. She placed it down hurriedly. The coffee was hot, but lacked cream and sugar, an obvious breach of Maple Rise's standard service protocol. Before he could say anything, she vanished into the kitchen. She won't look at me, Jonas thought. Not once did her eyes meet his, not ordinary absent-mindedness, intentional avoidance, a deliberate lack of connection, as if afraid that sustained eye contact might expose something forbidden. He kept watching. A well-dressed man entered, white shirt, black tie, polite face. As soon as he sat near the window, Lani appeared this time with a completely different demeanor. She smiled. Her eyes lit up. Her voice rang out like a gentle bell. "Good morning. Sir, I'm Lani. I'll be serving you today." "Would you like to try our new special roast coffee?" Jonas was stunned. The girl who had been cold and withdrawn was now vibrant, radiant, almost effortlessly charming, a completely different person in less than a minute. He watched as she gently placed a napkin, asked about allergies, and recommended the freshly baked blueberry muffins. When the customer handed her a credit card, she smiled and thanked him with both hands, a gesture Jonas had personally trained into staff from day one. "This isn't random," he muttered. Over the next 30 minutes, Jonas observed other tables. Every customer paying with a card received warm, chatty service, constant coffee refills, and cheerful check-ins. But when an old man in faded denim sat down and pulled out a few dollar bills, Lani simply nodded, took his order in silence, and walked away. A pattern was emerging clear, consistent, and cold. Cash equals fewer words. Card equals VIP treatment. Only the payment method differed, but the gap felt like going from welcome guest to unwanted presence. Jonas felt his heart sink. This wasn't just discrimination. It was drilled behavior. Lani's reactions weren't emotional, they were trained, programmed, defensive. He recalled Maple Rise's first training session where he stressed that every customer had equal value, whether janitor or bank CEO, whether paying with credit or coins. But here, that principle was distorted. Another rule, unspoken, unofficial, seemed to govern. Jonas spotted the manager, a short man with arms crossed, stationed near the back kitchen door. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, always watching Lani, especially when she approached the less polished customers. And then something strange happened. As Lani passed Jonas's table again, holding a bill for another table, he said softly, "Thank you, Lani." She paused for a split second, then nodded, as if afraid someone might see. She didn't say a word, but her eyes, for the first time, briefly met his, and within that fleeting glance was something not cold, not scared, but sorrow. A sorrow so well hidden it had become instinct. Jonas realized that to reach the truth, he needed more than observation. He needed to gain the trust of Lani and others like her. But how could they trust a nameless, powerless stranger paying with cash? He took a deep breath and decided tomorrow he would return. But next time, he'd go deeper, not just the face behind the apron, but the heart suffocating beneath it. The next morning, Jonas arrived at the Lowell Maple Rise branch earlier, 6:30 a.m. The air was crisp, the sun barely warming the weathered wooden sign above the entrance. He wore an old hoodie and the same cap, letting flecks of white paint stain his sleeves to keep up the look of a blue-collar worker on his way to an early shift. This time, he chose a table closer to the cashier. Today's mission wasn't just about service, it was about the money trail, because he suspected these receipts weren't just missing, they may have been erased before even being printed. A different server approached today, male, salt and pepper hair, name tag reading Don. When Jonas mentioned paying cash, the man's expression darkened slightly. No greeting, no "which bread do you prefer?" No suggestion for drinks, Just a scribbled note and a silent departure. Jonas took a sip of the lukewarm coffee. No cream, no sugar, no receipt. When he asked for a copy of his bill to check prices, Don paused, then replied quickly, "Receipt printer's broken." That line sounded eerily familiar. Lani had said nearly the same thing yesterday. Jonas nodded calmly, but his eyes locked onto the POS terminal Don had used. It wasn't the updated model Maple Rise had rolled out 2 years ago. This older machine had been decommissioned company-wide and replaced with a cloud-based system synced to headquarters accounting software. That machine had no connection, no sync, no way for central systems to know what was happening. Jonas swallowed a curse. He quietly observed 3 more transactions. All customers paid in cash. None received receipts, and all were rung up on the same outdated terminal by the same expressionless Don, like a mechanic repeating a task for the 1,000th time, no longer caring who's watching, his next test becoming the anomaly. Jonas ordered a $10.75 meal and handed over a $20 bill. Don nodded slightly, pressed a few buttons, and returned. Exactly $8, nearly 1,025 cents short. No receipt to dispute it. "Would you mind double-checking that amount?" Jonas asked, his tone casual. Don frowned, feigned confusion, rummaged in the drawer, and tossed in another loose coin. No apology, no explanation, no sign this was a mistake. It felt rehearsed, like the discrepancy was hardwired. Jonas sipped the bitter coffee, now boiling inside. He remembered the HQ report. This location had a higher-than-average cash transaction rate, yet reported revenue was 18% lower. Card payments fully accounted. The problem wasn't the food, not the quality. It was the transactions that didn't exist, unrecorded, undocumented, leaving no trace. Jonas bent down, pretending to tie his shoe, and stealthily snapped a photo of the POS machine using a phone hidden in his jacket. Just one piece of evidence, but enough to begin mapping the fraud. This wasn't just theft. It was an underground system designed to erase transactions from existence entirely. On the wall, near the cashier, Jonas spotted a small sign that read, "Integrity is serving others even when no one is watching." He thought to himself, maybe it's time. Someone started watching. Jonas left the restaurant that morning with his head spinning, as if waking from a sad dream, one of those dreams where even after you open your eyes, the truth remains, raw and painful. He didn't need the financial reports to know he was facing a systemic infection, and like any disease, it didn't begin with just one symptom. It was a pattern, a lifestyle, a habit rooted deep. That night, in the small apartment he had temporarily rented in Lowell, Jonas carefully opened his laptop and connected a mini camera hidden in his shirt button. The morning footage played back frame by frame. Lani eyes constantly avoiding. Don accidentally giving the wrong change. The old POS system not printing receipts. Card-paying customers greeted with darling and smiles. Cash-paying customers met with empty stares. Jonas watched the video over and over. A thought surfaced. This isn't a restaurant anymore. It's a stage, and only a few people get treated like the audience by the actors. The next morning, Jonas returned, this time with a backpack containing another hidden recording device, disguised as a power bank. He sat near the entrance, where he could see 80% of the restaurant space. At 8:15, the manager arrived, a short man, dull grey suit, eyes sharp as a blade, name tag pinned to his chest, Brian Calloway. Jonas watched him move like a hawk. No yelling, no need for volume, just a look. And every staff member immediately shifted, sat up straighter, smiled, tied their hair back, poured coffee like they were filming a commercial. But something strange happened when an elderly woman, probably in her 70s, stepped in and carefully laid coins on the table to pay for a bowl of oatmeal. Lani, the same woman who had once stayed silent with Jonas, this time served her gently. She asked a few quiet questions and pursed her lips as if afraid. When the old woman pulled out her money, Lani's eyes flicked immediately toward Brian. He was leaning against the wall, eyes locked on that table. As the old woman bent down to tie her shoelaces, Jonas saw Lani pull a $5 bill from her pocket and quietly place it in the cash drawer. She had just used her own money to cover the payment. Jonas felt a chill down his spine. Not just because it broke protocol, but because of Lani's expression afterward, as if she had just done something wrong. To protect what was right. For the next 45 minutes, Jonas kept recording. Card-paying customers were offered new menu items even when they didn't ask. Cash-paying customers were immediately asked, paying before or after, as if trust had to be tested. Every time someone paid in cash, Brian appeared almost like he had a sixth sense for unbanked money. Jonas realized there weren't just two styles of service, there were two scripts entirely. One light script where actors beamed, coffee overflowed, and plates were artfully arranged. And one dark script where every move was about one thing: keep the customer quiet, take the money, and make them disappear. Lani Jonas now understood wasn't cold. She was a good actor, forced into the wrong role. She knew what was right, but had worn the costume so long, she no longer dared to change it. At the end of that morning, a young man paid in cash. Brian whispered something into Don's ear. After the customer left, Jonas watched Don open the drawer and quietly pocket a $10 bill. No one said anything. No one asked. Everyone kept working as if this happened every day. And maybe it did. Jonas rubbed his temples. He didn't yet have enough evidence for a formal conclusion, but he had too many reasons not to walk away. Tomorrow, he thought to himself, I'll do more than observe. Tomorrow, I'll make someone tell the truth. On Tuesday morning, Jonas arrived earlier than usual. He sat at a table behind a large column, able to see most of the restaurant without being noticed. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, casting long beams across the grey-tiled floor and directly onto Lani's face as she arranged spoons and forks. He noticed her hands were trembling. Unlike the first days, her movements today seemed rushed, uneven. A spoon fell once, then again. She bent to pick it up, but didn't look up. Her face lowered, dark hair falling across her cheek. Jonas felt a stab in his chest. She was scared of something, or more precisely, she was living in a system where wrongdoing was normalized, and doing the right thing had become dangerous. He waited for a lull in customers. Around 9:40, the place began to quiet. Brian was in the back office, eyes glued to his phone, a rare moment where Lani wasn't under close watch. Jonas raised a hand gently. Lani approached. Her voice was the same monotone as always. "What would you like?" "The usual," Jonas replied softly, then tilted his head and looked her in the eye for the first time in 3 days. "Lani, you don't have to answer. But if you feel there's something wrong happening here, just nod." She stood still. For a few seconds, the air froze. The sizzle from the kitchen, the clink of spoons in the distance all faded. Only her eyes finally looking into his, and then she nodded. "Just a little, like a breath." "Can you tell me what's going on?" Jonas asked gently, barely above a whisper. "I want to help, but I can't if I don't understand." Lani glanced around. Her eyes flicked toward the manager's office, then toward a camera on the ceiling. She swallowed, then whispered, "Not here. Not now. When?" Then Jonas asked, calmly. She exhaled sharply, like someone stepping past the edge of fear. "If you come back. At 11:30, I'll have a break, just 10 minutes. Then she walked away. Before Jonas could respond. 11:31. Jonas pretended to take a phone call in the parking lot. He stood next to the beat-up pickup truck he'd rented to keep up his disguise, holding an empty coffee cup. Lani stepped out from the side door, wearing a light jacket. She didn't look at him immediately. Instead, walking behind the restaurant to a small wooden bench where employees took quick breaks, Jonas approached. "Mind if I sit?" Lani nodded. Her face was bare, no makeup, eyes a little red maybe from lack of sleep. But this time, her voice wasn't monotone. It was real. It was tired. "Who are you?" she asked directly. No small talk. "Someone who wants the truth," Jonas replied, meeting her eyes without hiding. "And someone who won't let you carry it alone." Lani looked at him, suspicion in her eyes, but then it faded. "What have you seen enough to know you're not the bad guy?" Jonas said slowly. "And enough to know you're trapped in a system that suffocates good people." Lani pressed her lips together. She pulled a small folded paper from her pocket, a handwritten receipt with no transaction ID. "This is a ghost receipt," she said. "We write them by hand, off the system. The real order goes into a separate log. The report we send to corporate shows a lower number." Jonas wasn't surprised, but it hurt. "Brian's behind it." She nodded. "He forces everyone to hit a quota. If you don't, you get flagged. But if you play along, you get a cut. No one dares say no. Everyone has something to lose. And you," Lani looked Jonas in the eye, "my son's 4. I work morning shifts so I can pick him up in the afternoon. I once said no, and they cut my hours. Brian knows I need rent money, asthma meds for my boy. He messaged, 'If you don't want to lose your son, don't lose your job.' I'm not a thief, but I don't know what else to do." Her last words nearly caught in her throat. Jonas clenched his empty cup. "You're not a thief, Lani," he said firmly. "You're someone who's been cornered." She lowered her head, sobbing. "I just want to do the right thing, but the more right I try to be, the easier it is to get fired." A cold wind passed by, but Jonas didn't feel cold. He felt pain. "Tomorrow," he said, "things will begin to change, but I need you to be strong. Can you do that?" Lani lifted her head, and in her swollen eyes, for the first time, was light. "I'm scared, but I'm tired of being scared." On the fourth morning, Jonas entered Maple Rise with a different fire. No longer just a CEO in disguise conducting field research, but a man carrying a rising fury like lava waiting to burst through rock. He had spoken with Lani. He knew the ghost receipts were real. But today, he needed to witness the whole game top to bottom. At exactly 7:00 a.m., Brian entered as usual, carrying a large Mr. Bean coffee cup, quiet but commanding. A slight nod from him was all it took for the entire room to shift like a stage awaiting the director's cue. Lani avoided his gaze, but Jonas noticed Brian's eyes were like scales. The moment they landed on someone, that person shrank. Around 9:10, a man in a work shirt stepped in dried mud still clinging to his face, a worn leather wallet peeking from his back pocket as he sat. Jonas watched like a panther on the hunt. The man laid a $20 bill on the table and ordered a breakfast for $11.25. Don took the cash, walked to the magic old POS machine, and rang up $8.75. His left hand pocketed the rest, face unchanged, gave the change like nothing had happened. Jonas scanned the room. No one said a word. No one looked twice. But everyone knew. 10:05 a.m. A woman in a white blouse and smart watch walked in to order a $17.90 takeaway meal, paid with a $50 bill. Sarah, the cashier, took notes carefully, accepted the money, then quietly rang up $20.40 and gave back change accordingly. $2.50 vanished right in front of Jonas, and no one verified it. No camera, no notes, just a glance, a smile, and the press of a button. Jonas felt a part of him want to stand up, slam his hand on the table, and shout, "You're all stealing." But he held back, not because he was afraid, but because he needed to go deeper to the very bottom rung of this ladder of wrongdoing. 11:47 a.m. Brian emerged from the office. Just as Lani had described, he moved around the kitchen counter, whispering to each employee, not commanding, just murmuring, his face calm, his voice soft, like a lullaby. "Can you take care of table 4 today? Watch the receipt for table 9. Don't print it too quickly. Wednesday, you need to make up for what you fell short on last week. Understand?" Jonas jotted these words quickly into his notebook. They were under quota pressure, forced to steal, and if they couldn't, they'd be pushed out. Or worse, their lives would be used against them. Around 1:15 p.m., Lani walked out of Brian's office with red-rimmed eyes. She avoided Jonas's gaze, but he knew exactly what had just happened. A performance review, really a psychological blow, like so many others before it. And later that day, Lani told him. He said if I didn't meet my contribution quota, they'd cut my afternoon shifts next month. And I know what that means. Jonas sat still, eyes locked on Brian, counting money in the corner office. The door was ajar. Brian's fingers sorted dollar bills into stacks front counter, kitchen, management, each with a sticky note labeled in messy handwriting, a black ledger, off-the-books accounting, an underground budget, a shadow tax system run by him alone. For a moment, Brian looked up straight at Jonas, as if sensing something. Jonas smiled, just a little, but his eyes were cold as steel. In his mind, one sentence echoed, "He's not just stealing money, he's stealing people's dignity." And that was going to end today. Jonas had met thousands of employees in his life, from line cooks to regional executives. But no one had ever left him speechless after listening like Lani did that afternoon. They met again in the rear parking lot. A breeze picked up from the north. The girl in her thin uniform jacket clutched her arms for warmth, but her eyes looked like they had just stepped out of a prison cell. "You want to know why no one here dares to speak up?" she asked, her voice dry. Jonas simply nodded. Lani took a deep breath and began to tell, not just in words, but in details, like unlocking doors inside her. Brian. He doesn't yell. He listens more than anyone. But what he gathers isn't information, it's leverage. She spoke with a steady voice that trembled underneath. Every employee at this Maple Rise branch knew too much. Sarah, the cashier, had gone bankrupt over student loans and now lived with her paralyzed mother. Brian knew. One mention of the word hospice, and she folded. Don had been in a small, unreported car accident 3 years ago. Brian somehow found out. Now all he had to do was threaten to call the police, and Don would sign any falsified report without a question. Robert, the head chef, was waiting on his work visa renewal. Brian had a copy of the immigration lawyer's email. "He's like a shark slowly swallowing pieces of our lives," Lani said, hands clenched together. "And then he uses them like velvet-wrapped chains." Jonas listened, each word cutting deeper. He remembered a line he'd read in his youth. "Control isn't just about power, it's about fear that never leaves." And Brian was cultivating fear like a farmer planting seeds, patiently, precisely, strategically. "I once tried to say no," Lani recalled. "The first time he told me, don't ask cash-paying customers if they want a receipt. I said I couldn't do that. And do you know what he did?" Jonas looked at her. Lani gave a bitter smile. "He sent an email inviting me to his office for a private chat. In that room, he didn't threaten. He told a story about his daughter, how smart she was, how she needed tuition money. He said, 'I'm a parent too. I understand you. I don't want to cut your hours, but you have to understand how the game works.'" Jonas clenched his fists. Everything was clearer now. This wasn't fraud. It was a psychological web where people weren't trapped by whips, but by the fear of their own secrets being exposed. "One time, I didn't meet the quota. and I used my own money to put into the cash drawer," Lani said, her voice trembling. "Not because I'm greedy, but because I was scared. Scared to lose my son. Scared of being called a traitor. Scared that if I got fired, no one would believe me." Jonas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Silent. For the first time, he saw clearly. Some people don't need to be taught ethics. They just need to believe kindness still has a place. Back at his temporary apartment, Jonas opened his laptop and began writing a report. Not to send yet, but to document each name, each exploited secret, each method of control, each manipulation tactic. He realized Brian didn't need to make threats to keep people quiet. He only needed enough information and to plant it in the cracks of their lives. And in that moment, Jonas understood the thief isn't just stealing money. He's stealing people's ability to trust themselves. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just expose a scammer. He would unlock every box, every person bound by invisible ropes, and return to them the thing that seemed the smallest: trust. It was Friday. Maple Rise entered the weekend busier than usual. But amid the sounds of sizzling pans, coffee machines, and fake laughter aimed at VIP customers, Jonas noticed something had changed. Not in the system, but in the smallest expressions. Lani no longer completely avoided his eyes. She moved quickly, but not frantically. And when she placed a coffee on the table, she spoke with her eyes. "I'm trying." Jonas didn't respond with words. He simply nodded, handing her an invisible key acknowledgement. 10:03 a.m. An elderly man walked in, white-haired, wearing a worn brown coat. He sat by the window, ordered a 14.25 breakfast, and pulled out some cash. Lani took the order, and in her eyes, Jonas saw a battle. She could easily follow the underground procedure: no printed receipt, process through the old POS, lower the price, and pocket the difference. Brian wasn't in the kitchen. Everything was in place to stay in character, but she didn't. Jonas watched, heart pounding, as she quietly entered the correct amount, pulled a receipt from the drawer, placed it on the man's table, and didn't keep a cent. No one praised her, no audience for that act of integrity. But for Jonas, it was the first act of defiance, a rebellion not shouted, not cried, but carried out in silent honesty. Around 10:40, a teenage boy in a gas station uniform entered, ordered a £9.50 meal, and paid in loose change. Don, the same man who pocketed extra change days ago, was serving him. Jonas watched from behind a wooden pillar. Don took the cash, walked to the register. He hesitated, like a cold breeze. Jonas could feel the inner struggle, something he'd never seen in Don before. Then, Don rang up the full amount. No shortcut, no theft. He returned the exact change, gently placed the receipt on the tray. A small act. But for Jonas, it rang louder than any music playing in the diner. After lunch, Jonas sat across the street at a cafe, not for the coffee, but to watch from a distance. From his seat, he could see the back door of the restaurant cracked open. Around 2 p.m. Lani stepped out, this time alone. She didn't look around, didn't flinch. She sat on the wooden bench, opened her plastic lunchbox, and ate slowly. But Jonas noticed. She was holding the spoon with her left hand. Her right hand looked slightly swollen, bruised. What had happened? An hour later, as she served his table, Jonas asked softly, "You okay?" Lani replied in a flat voice. "Brian knows I didn't report a transaction today, but I told him I pressed the wrong button. Maybe he doesn't believe me." Jonas clenched his fists beneath the table. This wasn't just exploitation. This was punishment. And if no one acted soon, people like Lani would lose the courage to keep going. At the end of her shift, as Lani cleared a table, she found a folded piece of paper left behind by someone. She opened it. Inside, handwritten, "People can only threaten you if you believe they're stronger than the truth." No signature. But she knew who it was from. She folded the note, tucked it into her pocket, and looked up. For the first time in months, Lani walked out the restaurant door, not with her head down, but with the posture of someone walking toward a new choice. Saturday morning. Maple Rise was packed. Jonas entered as usual, still in the disguise of a humble worker. But today, in his pocket wasn't just his wallet. It was a thick folder containing photos of fake receipts, fraudulent transactions, camera footage of pocketed cash, and Lani's handwritten statement. He was no longer just a witness. Today, he would change the game. Brian sat in the back office as usual, Bluetooth headset in one ear, flipping through ledgers, counting stacks of cash with the speed of a street hustler. Jonas walked up to the office door, knocked 3 times, firm and clear. "I'm busy," Brian said without looking up. Jonas didn't need an invitation. He stepped in, placing the thick folder on the desk. "We need to talk. Alone." Brian looked up, scowled. "Who are you?" His eyes narrowed, recognizing a familiar face. "You're that cash-paying customer. What do you want?" Jonas opened the folder, pulled out a business card, and set it on the desk. Jonas Ellison, founding CEO of Maple Rise. The air froze. Brian's face went pale. He leaned back in his chair, still clutching a wad of cash he hadn't put away. No way. You're joking. You think I spent a week in disguise, eating bad eggs and drinking cold coffee? Just to joke with someone like you, Jonas said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steel hard. Brian shot up, knocking over his chair. "I can explain." "No need." Jonas cut him off. "I've seen everything, from how you divide cash into shares, to how you whisper orders like a prison warden. I know you threatened Lani with losing her child if she didn't meet her quota. I know you bullied immigrant staff with visa threats. And I know you designed the ghost receipt system to skim revenue." Brian's face burned red. They all participated. They're the ones doing it. I was managing the situation. Jonas narrowed his eyes. Managing how? By making them use their own money, by forcing them to lie to elderly customers, by keeping off-the-books ledgers to share stolen cash. That's your idea of management, Brian pointed wildly at the folder. What proof do you have? Just stories. They made it up. They want me out because they're jealous. Jonas calmly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a hidden camera, small as a pen. He placed it on the desk. In here are 17 video recordings, 5 witnesses, and a clip of you saying, "If they don't lie, I'll cut their hours and make sure they never work in this industry again." Brian went silent. The silence lasted nearly 30 seconds. Jonas looked straight into his eyes. I used to think the worst thing was getting money stolen from me. But no, Brian, the worst thing is watching your own employees, decent people, turned into tools to feed the greed of a coward. Brian swallowed hard. We can work something out. I'll resign. You let me walk away, and I won't say a word. Deal? Jonas raised an eyebrow. You think I came here to make a deal with fraud? I'll return the money. All of it. Brian's voice trailed off. Money can be recovered, but dignity doesn't come back that easily. Jonas said. He stood up and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned around, eyes slicing through the last layer of Brian's self-defense. The police will arrive 15 minutes after me. The company has frozen your internal accounts. And I've notified the National Executive Board. You will never set foot in another Maple Rise restaurant. Not as a guest, and certainly not as a manager. Brian stepped back. They were part of it too. All of them. If I go down, they should too. Jonas stopped at the doorway, his voice low and heavy. No, they were victims, and I'm giving them a chance to make things right. Unlike you, they still fear their conscience. And the door closed behind him quietly, like the lid of a coffin sealing away someone who destroyed trust. That afternoon, the news spread like wildfire. Brian had been fired. The police arrived just before 3 p.m. They didn't cuff him in front of customers, but the look in the employees' eyes said it all. The reign of fear was over. But what Jonas did next was what truly left the entire Maple Rise Lowell branch stunned. He stepped out of the office holding a clipboard, his voice firm but calm. I'll be speaking with each of you, one-on-one, over the next hour. No one objected. No one left. From cashiers to kitchen staff, servers to janitors, they all sat up straight, like students awaiting the principal. But they didn't know this principal hadn't come to judge. He had come to listen. The first to enter was Don, the middle-aged man, normally cold, gruff, and clumsy with his hands, now looked like a child caught sneaking candy. Jonas didn't question him immediately. He poured Don a glass of water, waited a few seconds, then said, "Can you tell me why you did it?" Don stared at the floor. "At first, I didn't," he whispered. But then Brian said, "He knew about the 2021 accident. If I didn't cooperate, he'd report it to the insurance." Jonas didn't judge. He simply jotted down a few notes and nodded. And after that, Don swallowed hard. After that, I got used to it. Sometimes I told myself, everyone's doing it. It's just a few bucks. But you know what? Every time I pocketed money, I saw my wife in my head. She was a nurse, honest to the bone. If she were still alive, she'd be ashamed of me." He lowered his head. Jonas said nothing, but his eyes carried something stronger than any punishment. Understanding why someone fell is the first step to helping them rise. Next came Sarah, the petite cashier. I hate myself," she said as soon as she sat down, tears welling. "I once wished Brian would get hit by a car just to make him disappear. He knew my mother was bedridden. He used that to force me to meet the quota." Jonas asked softly, "Do you want to keep working here?" Sarah looked up. "I don't know. I feel like I don't deserve to." "Sarah," he said, "remorse is the first sign of honesty. And I believe if you have the courage to tell the truth today, you can become the kind of employee this system needs most." Sarah broke down in tears. Lani was the last. She walked in with calm eyes, but Jonas could see a storm brewing behind that composed look. "You already know everything," she said, sitting down. "No," Jonas replied. "I know the facts, but I don't yet know your heart." Lani looked up at him. "When I gave my own money to make up the difference, I didn't do it out of fear. I did it because I didn't want that old man to feel like a burden. I'd seen my dad, dressed just like him, get treated like trash at a diner. I couldn't stand the thought of it happening again." Jonas slowly stood, opened a drawer, and took out a freshly printed employee badge. "Lani Harper, assistant manager." She froze. "You're not joking. I don't need perfect people. I need real people. People who've walked through the dark and still held on to their light." Lani clutched the badge. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled not from fear, but from touching trust for the first time after years of being doubted. After 3 hours of interviews, Jonas stepped out into the common area. The employees stood. No one spoke. They waited for the verdict. He looked around and said, "I'm not firing anyone who told the truth today, but I will keep those willing to make things right through action. You will be retrained, and if you prove change, you can become the foundation of a new era at Maple Rise." Applause broke out, not loud, but real, from hands once shaking in fear, now clapping for hope. And in each of their eyes, Jonas saw what he feared had been lost belief in themselves. 3 weeks after the cleansing, Maple Rise in Lowell was no longer the place Jonas had once entered with suspicion. No more averted gazes, no more handwritten receipts, no more hushed footsteps following the beep of the card reader. It was still the same restaurant, brown-painted walls, long wooden tables, the faint smell of waffles from the kitchen. But one thing had changed deeply. The people had been renewed from within. Jonas returned on a Tuesday morning, no disguise, no cap, no workman's shirt. He wore a white button-up, jeans, and walked in as himself, and was greeted with something that had been missing before: genuine smiles. Sarah, the cashier, who once trembled talking about her mother, now stood tall, hair neatly tied, her greeting steady. "Good morning, sir. Would you like a table by the window, Don?" The man who once pocketed spare change now walked the floor asking customers about their meals. sometimes helping an elderly man cut pancakes because he forgot his glasses. But the person who moved Jonas most was Lani. She stepped out from the kitchen in a fresh uniform, her name tag gleaming Lani Harper, assistant manager, her hair tied back, her face no longer guarded. She moved from table to table, not just with the posture of a manager, but with a special glow, the kind that comes from someone who once fell and climbed back up through kindness. "You came back," she said as she reached Jonas's table, her voice light and full of emotion. "You said you'd return." Jonas smiled. "And I heard there's a tough new manager here now." Lani laughed. Not forced, not hidden, a real laugh. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, something she would have never dared do before. "I thought you'd pick someone else at first. Someone who never messed up. Someone clean, untouched by the old system." Jonas shook his head. "People who've never made mistakes can enforce rules. But people who have made mistakes and own them are the ones who can keep others on the right path. You were the first to do what was right, even when no one was watching. To me, that matters more than any resume." Lani wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I don't know how much I can carry, but I know this from now on. No one here will be forced to bow down because of what's in a customer's wallet." Jonas nodded, pride shining in his eyes. The following week, Maple Rise officially launched the Integrity First program, an internal reform initiative inspired by Jonas's experience at the Lowell branch. Every store would now have a humanity representative, not just to monitor procedures, but to be a safe space for staff to report wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. The first person chosen to help design the program, Lani, she didn't just become an assistant manager. She became a symbol of someone once silenced, who chose to speak. A symbol of someone who thought she was only good for bowing, but instead stood and led. On Jonas's final visit to Lowell, he sat in his familiar corner by the waffle mural. Lani approached with a full cup of coffee this time, with sugar, cream, and care in every gesture. "Thank you," Jonas said. Lani smiled. "No. I'm the one who should thank you, because you didn't see my mistakes, you saw my reasons, because you saw me even when I couldn't look at myself." Jonas stayed silent. He looked around the restaurant, saw a young mum being kindly served by Sarah, saw Don chatting with a boy about pancake recipes, saw eyes everywhere, unafraid. In the place that was once a symbol of silence, he now saw what every CEO dreams of building that spring. The Lowell Maple Rise location was voted one of the top customer satisfaction sites in the entire system. But Jonas Ellison knew the ranking didn't capture the most important thing. What he witnessed wasn't just the transformation of a restaurant, it was the rebirth of people who had once lost faith in themselves. Lani didn't just become a great manager. She became the one colleagues turned to in tough times, not because she had power, but because she had once stood on the other side of fear and found the way through. Sarah started teaching basic accounting classes at a local church, helping young people understand the value of transparency even in the smallest numbers. Don, the quiet man who once bowed his head over a few stolen coins, was now the first to speak at monthly staff meetings, reminding everyone, Never trade your dignity for a few cents. And Jonas? He returned to headquarters, to a desk full of reports, numbers, and planning documents. But in his drawer, he kept a folded piece of paper, the one he had once written for Lani. People can only threaten you when you believe they're stronger than the truth. He kept it as a reminder that even as a CEO, even after building an empire, he could forget the most vital truth. Courage doesn't come from position. It comes from the choice we make every day between silence and action. One early morning in late April, Jonas received a small envelope from Lowell. Inside was a photo, the entire Maple Rise team smiling brightly outside the restaurant. In the middle, Lani held her 4-year-old son, his tiny hand holding a sign. "Today is my mom's first day as general manager," on the back of the photo, in handwritten ink. "Thank you for believing in someone who once thought she didn't deserve a second chance." Lani Jonas folded the photo, placed it on his desk, and looked out the window as dawn began to rise. He wondered how many other restaurants in his system had a Brian sitting in an office, and how many Lanis were swallowing their tears just to keep a shift. Then he picked up his phone, sent a message to every senior manager in the company. Stop measuring people by quotas. Start measuring them by the strength they show when standing in front of wrongdoing. Because in the end, what defines a system isn't revenue. It's how it treats people when they are at their most vulnerable.